Good evening, everyone. It's 6:01. We're going to go ahead and start tonight's meeting. Let's please take a row.
Commissioner Lyday, Commissioner Calandra, Commissioner Diaz, Here. Commissioner Kreiner. Commissioner Sturgill.
Present.
Vice Chair Bray. Here. Chair Vang.
Here. Thank you. We'll go and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone, if you can, please stand. Ready? Begin. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, I'll go ahead and read the procedures for the meeting. This meeting is being conducted in person and electronically. The public may participate in tonight's meeting by using the Zoom link provided on the Planning Commission agenda. Please note that all virtual participants will be on mute until they are called upon by the chair, at which point they will be unmuted. If you are a member of the public and would like to comment on an item, use the raise hand function on Zoom. To avoid any confusion, please wait for the item you desire to comment on to be called by the chair before electronically raising your hand. For each matter considered by the Commission, there will first be a staff presentation, followed by a presentation from the project applicant. Testimony from supporters of the project would then be taken, followed by testimony from those in opposition. The applicant will have the right to a final rebuttal presentation prior to closing the public hearing. In accordance with Section 13 of Article 2 of the Planning Commission Rules and Regulations governing length of public debate, all public testimony from those in support and in opposition of the project will be limited to 3 minutes per person. The 3 lights on the podium next to the microphone will indicate the amount of time remaining for the speaker. The green light will be turned on when the speaker begins. The yellow light will come on with the soft bell ring when 1 minute is remaining. Speakers should be completing the testimony by the time the red light comes on with the final bell indicating time has expired. All in-person public testimony must be presented to the Commission at the podium. Please note that any testimony that references race, religion, ethnicity, economic status, national origin, or any other classification protected under state or federal law in a derogatory manner shall be deemed irrelevant and will not be considered by the Commission in making its land use determinations. If you challenge these land use matters in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised in oral or written testimony or before the close of the hearing. We'll go ahead and start today's meeting with the approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes?
Good evening, Chair Vang, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Israel Trejo with the Planning and Development Department. There are no changes to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any commissioners have any changes, or do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the agenda. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Vice Chair Bray, a second by Commissioner Diaz. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Motion's approved. Under the consent calendar, we do have the meeting minutes for June 19, 2024. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Okay. All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Diaz. We have a second by Commissioner Calandra. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion's approved. Do we have any reports by the commissioners? Thank you. We'll move to continue matters. This is item ID 24949, consideration of an appeal regarding tentative parcel map number 2023-13. Do we have any commissioners who needs to recuse himself?
Yes, I will need to recuse myself. It's a conflict with my business.
All right. Let's go ahead and we'll wait for Vice Chair Bray to step out of the room before we start. All right, thank you for your patience.
Okay, good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Rob Holt with Planning and Development Department, and tonight staff brings forth consideration of an appeal of tentative parcel map 2023-13 and the related environmental finding. The subject property is located on the northeast corner of West Olive Avenue and Northwest Avenue. It is surrounded, adjacent to the north is an existing office and mini storage. To the east is vacant disturbed land and other offices. To the south is Roding Park and the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, and to the west is Caltrans District 6 office and parking lot. The subject property is currently zoned neighborhood mixed use and planned for neighborhood mixed use. As well, to the south is Open Space Park, to the north, medium density residential, and west, Employment Business Park. Before getting into the appeal, the project at bay today is a tentative parcel map, which is what was submitted, was an application for a tentative parcel map. And here you can see the map with Olive Avenue to the south running east to west, and West Avenue running north-south on the west side. The parcel is being split into two approximately directly through the center, going north to south. The appeal, the parcel map was approved on February 6th of this year, and the appeal period ended on February 21st. The applicant originally appealed the project on February 14th within that timeline, as well as Councilmember Miguel Arias on February 16th. And then after meetings with staff, which we'll get into, the applicant updated their appeal on June 21st, which was originally stayed. And again, once that being appealed tonight are parcel map conditions of approval only. With previous planning commissions from the continuance, the last 4 we had continued, and that was to allow for staff to discuss and hold meetings with Public Works, Public Utilities, and the applicant. As part of those meetings, and resulted in the review of their appeal and what did apply and what did not apply. And it was determined through staff's determination that we would remove condition number 4, which was for the address plan, and in its entirety, the Public Works Communities Facility District memorandum. With that, there's an understanding from the applicant that requirements of the Public Works Memorandum, accepting the street light requirements and the sidewalks meeting ADA standards, as well as the Public Utilities Memorandum, are applicable, but only to future development of the site. So when future development occurs, those other requirements of the Public Utilities and Public Works may be required, but not as part of what's being appealed today. And again, as I said, what is being appealed is the street lights consistent to Public Works standards, and sidewalk consistent with ADA standards would be the only applicable conditions of approval being appealed. It also can be noted that in the Public Utilities Memorandum, there is a requirement for cross-access for solid waste. There's only one solid waste enclosure on a property, so there needs to be a requirement for access across both properties if it were to be approved to allow for that. So that would actually be a requirement, but was not originally appealed. So for the street walks and sidewalks meeting ADA standards, these are standards required. Well, it starts with Fresno Municipal Code, and that's section 153308, which is a decision of a parcel map or tentative map, in this case a parcel map. And as part of that decision, subsection A2E requires that for a decision of a parcel map, there needs to be imposing conditions in compliance with another section, 153311, which is conditions of approval of a parcel map. For the conditions of approval of a parcel map section, there is a requirement that requires the review authority shall adopt conditions of approval that carry out specific requirements of Chapter 15, Article 38, which are improvements in security. And of that, so you have a decision that requires imposing conditions of approval for this article, which then requires various improvements, such as curb gutters, sidewalk, drainage, and the like. What is applicable to this appeal and that section that's left from our discussions is streetlights, and whether those streetlights are existing or proposed wouldn't matter. They're still required to be installed to the City of Fresno Public Works standards, and as well as sidewalks, whether those are existing or proposed as part of this parcel map, whether the property's developed or not, and there's sidewalks there or not, they have to meet ADA standards after requirements of approval of a parcel map. And then going through findings, I'm not going to go through every single one in depth, but I will mention that there are 3 applicable of the 5 for findings of a parcel map, and I'll follow up with supplemental. So to start, finding 1 is applicable. It's essentially saying that the proposed subdivision shall be consistent with general plan, operative plan, adopted policies, and the municipal code. The municipal code is what was stated before, those sections for improvements in security requirements. Finding 2 is not applicable. It's passive and natural heating and cooling. This only applies to tentative tract maps, which would require 5 or more lots. This is a parcel map, which is 4 or less, in this case 2 lots. So this would not apply. Finding 3 also would not apply because it is specific to subdivisions that require or propose 500 or more dwelling units residences. That does not apply in this case, since there's only 2 parcels and they're not residences. Finding 4 does apply infrastructure and capacity when there exists sufficient infrastructure for water, runoff, stormwater, wastewater, and solid waste to serve the proposed subdivision. If there is existing infrastructure, which there is, but if it's found to be deficient, which it's not believed it is, the plan shall show that sufficient capacity will be provided. In this case, it's understood that at this point it is sufficient. This does apply if that were not the case. And then compliance with floodplain regulations does comply according to Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District Memorandum. The existing improvement shall remain as is, and it's not in a floodplain area, and so everything complies as existing according to flood control. Now, there are supplemental findings as well, and these are findings required for whether it's a map or a parcel map. The review authority shall not approve a parcel map unless it can also make the following findings when they are applicable. And what is applicable is number 1, which is construction of improvements. It is in the interest of public health and safety, and it is necessary as a prerequisite to the orderly development of the surrounding area to require the construction of improvements within a specified time after recordation of a parcel map of 4 or fewer parcels where improvements are required. As stated previously, those 2 improvements, the streetlights and the sidewalks, are requirements, and they are in the interest of public health and safety. So that finding does apply. The remaining 3 findings do not apply. And with that, staff recommends upholding the director's decision and denying the appeal of the project. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you. Appreciate it. Do we have the applicant here?
It's a really long mic. Good evening, everyone, commissioners, city staff. Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. I mean, yeah, I'm not as tall. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our appeal, summarize the reports, the letters, and the overall support of our position. My name is Todd Scheller. I'm Vice President with Lyles Diversified Incorporated, retired major with the 144th Fighter Wing, and prior to joining Lyles in 2001, I was associate professor in the construction management program at Fresno State. I started my career with WM Lyles at 1210 West Olive. That's one of the buildings that we're talking about that's on your map. This was the second corporate office of the Lyles organization. We started in Avenal. We developed the area in 1967, which is the Lyles Plaza back in the day with Olive and West. So we've been around there for quite a while. We made the move from Avenal in 1968. The original Avenal office was donated to the city, and that is the city hall as of today. We want to do the same for the zoo. That's the bottom line. So that's really what we're here for. That's the goal. Our objective behind reinstating the lot line in the original location for 44 years, by the way, 1968 to about 2012, is to facilitate the transfer and ownership of the existing western parcel, which is 1250, over to the Fresno Chaffee Zoo through a donation. That's really the crux of all the back and forth with city staff. I'm going to go over a little bit of the overview of the maps that are in your packet. Obviously, we have the 1210 office building on the west side. We have our brethren, the Teamsters, the credit union, and my buddy Ryan in the Farm Bureau in the back. We've all been there forever. Kmart's long gone, right? WM Lyles Co., our construction company, has its headquarters in that office. So we maintain the Lyles family name through 1968. On the 1250 side, that's been several tenants, to be honest. It was a land bank. Caltrans was there for a little bit. It was a little bit of a self-help tenant for a while. But once we consolidated our Lyles offices, we purchased the building, made it a campus for that area. And then when we outgrew that space, we moved part of our operations north, and we looked for a tenant. And we're huge supporters of the zoo. The Lyles family is a massive supporter of the zoo, as the city of Fresno. So we went to them first. So it is currently the corporate office of the Fresno Chaffee Zoo, but unfortunately to date, they're a tenant and not an owner, and they would really like to be the owner. So this has been a 3-year endeavor for us. We appreciate working with city staff along the way, but we know that their particular view of our request was kind of a square peg in a round hole, to be honest with you. I'm going to go over some of the city staff's discussion points tonight relative to the MAP Act and relative to the municipal code. Both of those apply to parcels with improvements, future improvements. They do not apply to a lot line reinstatement with no improvements. And to be honest with you, nothing does. The municipal code or the MAP Act doesn't have that unique little sliver of who would reinstate a property line and do nothing, right? But that's what we're trying to do. So there's no code that addresses that situation. It's unique. It does take a waiver. The director can do that in the MAP Act and the municipal code because they apply to development, design, improvements, and impacts. Both of those items. I get that. We're in development. We're in construction. But this request does not have development. It does not have design. It does not have improvements, and it does not have impacts across the board. There's nothing there. So we have 0 of those. But we've been treated as though we do have that. And really that's the conflict, I think, between us as property owners and city staff, and we've struggled for that resolution. This single conflict, is noted in several requirements of the May 21st revised conditions from the Planning and Development Department. According to those conditions, if you read through those, I would need to complete all of the requested work before a permit of occupancy will be issued to me per Municipal Code 13211. I've already got occupancy. I don't need an occupancy permit. That doesn't apply. So we have occupied existing offices that aren't going to do anything. There's absolutely no nexus to the city's requirements and the conditions of approval and corresponding codes and what we need in this unique situation. They really don't tie to one another, although they're trying to. To emphasize part of the agenda this evening, please note the staff's requirement in item 2A of your packet of our appeal, and that indicates, and I quote, "Development shall take place in accordance with the conditions of approval for the tentative parcel map." Again, we have no development, but the city municipal code defines development as, and I quote again, "means any building, structure, or other improvement, or the construction, erection, or installation thereof, in, over, or upon any parcel." We don't comply with municipal code defined term of development because we are not doing any. And that has been the struggle. So a couple reinforcement areas in the July 3rd condition of approval. I think you've seen that. Again, we worked with city staff quite a lot to try to get those narrowed down so that we can understand each other. But really, Municipal Code 3101 focuses on design and improvement of subdivisions. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but at this point in time, we have no design, no development, no improvements, and absolutely no impacts. Everything is existing. We're simply trying to reinstate a line that has been there since 1968. Furthermore, the municipal code and the correlation with the MAP Act, which I briefly discussed, I talked about that in my appeal letter. There was really a concern between the two. One bounced off each other. There really is not a waiver process, a true waiver process, and there needs to be. And that is really, and it was pointed out tonight, that it's the review of improvement plans, the installation of improvements, and for security to guarantee the installation of improvements. And again, we have no improvements. Everything is existing. So we're confident that this situation can be addressed by legal means. Actually, the MAP Act and the Municipal Code, because the director can grant a waiver in this unique situation. The codes allow for that. Your approval of our appeal will uphold all code requirements and maintain consistency within the city. That's very important. I know that from this Planning Commission. Because we have no development, no design, no improvements, and no impacts. It's a single process. The square peg round hole can be mitigated with your approval or appeal and the director's waiver, again, in this unique situation by law. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly urge you to consider that in light of our goal, our primary objective of reinstating the lot line that's been there for 44 years, it's extremely important to the community, the area around there. If you've ever visited, I spent 20 years of my career down there, that we occupy and that the zoo offices stay at the corner of Olive and West. They cannot be a long-term tenant. They need to own that property at some point in time. To do that, we need a lot line reinstatement with a waiver of all the requested development items, because in this unique case, they do not apply to us from a development standpoint. No improvements, no impacts, nothing. Again, I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. If there's any specifics related to the maps, I do have our civil engineers, Morton Patello here. Greg and Keith are here to answer any specifics on that. But I do appreciate your time and the willingness to interact in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commission? Go ahead, Ms.
Actually, it's not necessarily for the applicant. It just seems that staff has spent a lot of time on this project, and it's a really simple request. Can there be some kind of justification for all of the requirements that are being made in terms of the, the improvements and, I mean, that whole streetlight thing? I mean, everything is, the infrastructure's all there, right?
Yes, good evening again, Planning Commissioners. Commissioner Calandra, so a few questions or a few issues were raised that I'd like to address. So just want to remind the commission tonight that before you tonight is an appeal of a tentative parcel map, the conditions. So an unmerger or a waiver of, what was the term, a waiver provision to basically make the project as it, or the property as it was before, that's not before you tonight. What's before you tonight is an appeal of conditions that have been issued for this project. If the applicant wants to determine if an unmerger or a waiver is allowed, that's a separate application. Director's determination, that's not before you tonight. So what is before you tonight are conditions of the parcel map. And the applicant mentioned that the property is developed, therefore these conditions shouldn't apply. However, I'm going to paraphrase section 15-3311. So it doesn't mention whether a property is developed or not. So in approving an application for a tentative parcel map, the review authority may impose any conditions necessary to make the findings required within section 153309, required findings. So under that same section, 153311, is mandatory conditions, right? So mandatory conditions, 153311 C3, carry out the specific requirements of section 38, improvements and security. So improvements and security notate the requirements for streetlights, as well as bringing sidewalks up to ADA standards. So that's what this is about. All the other memos that have been attached to this project, public utilities, this property's has existing infrastructure. Most of those requirements within the public utilities memo do not apply. The only one that does apply is the cross-access agreement. As Rob mentioned, the CFD requirement went away, the addressing plan went away. The only thing that remains is, again, bringing up the property to ADA standards relative to streetlights and sidewalks.
So that's not existing at this point.
So the streetlights exist, and Harmon may be able to speak to this further, but the streetlights exist. My understanding is that they don't exist to city standards. The sidewalks exist, but my understanding that they may or may not exist to city standard, and it will take an engineer to go out and to measure if it meets the, what's the term, the grade.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Harmon Dollywall, Public Works Department. Izzy is correct. The streetlights are existing in the area, but they are not to current city standards. So there are streetlights around the area, but just not current to city standards. And The requirement is only on Olive Avenue, where they're not to city standard. The lights on West and on Hedges are to city standard, and those are not being asked to be replaced or new lights to be installed. It is solely just on Olive Avenue. And the sidewalks, they have to comply with the ADA law that's been in here since I think about 30 years. Any sidewalk that's not off grade, which the applicant's engineer would verify the sidewalk grade to make sure that it's in compliance, would need to be replaced and brought into compliance. And that does include the drive approaches on Hedges. They do not have the 4-foot ADA path of travel behind the drive approach throat, so those need to be removed and replaced and brought to ADA compliance. Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the commission for the applicant or city?
I have a question. How would your recommendation help with the beautifying of the area?
So again, the recommendations implement ADA requirements relative to the grade of the sidewalk as well as streetlights along Olive Avenue.
You guys are looking more of it as safety and making sure that everything's up to code.
That's correct, yes, safety and meeting city requirements, city standards.
Okay.
And who does that work? Do they have to hire a contractor? Does the city do it?
So the work on a parcel map is typically required of the developer. In this case, it would be Lyles. They would hire an engineer team to do the streetlight plan design and then hire the contractor to do the work. Typically, the work is required to be completed before the parcel map can be recorded as a final parcel map. There is a way that they can record the parcel map and then do the improvements at a later time. They just have to enter into a parcel map agreement, which is allowed under the city's municipal code.
Okay, and how long will they have to do it in?
So the parcel map agreement does allow for the map is going to record it. It's a 1-year agreement, but there are extensions that are allowed per the Muni Code. There's just extension fees that have to be paid, and they are allowed to extend the parcel map and eventually have to do the work before they get acceptance of the final map, the improvements, because if the work is not done, they pay a security that's they have a bond that's in place for the work to be completed. In the event that they never do the work can get completed. The city can call the bond. So there are options for them to not have to do the work before the map records, but eventually get the work done.
I have a question now for the applicant. Is it possible that the cost for this could be borne by both Chaffee Zoo and Lyles, where, they could do a fundraising campaign?
Yeah.
Just kind of
I
throwing
think there's
it
two key points. Both the city staff has indicated that the developer needs to do the work. We're not developing anything. We're just trying to put a lot line back. That's key one. The second thing, that any infrastructure that they're proposing to do is going to get taken out when the overpass goes over on the high-speed rail. We all know that. That starts right at the Teamsters. So everything else, we're going to put in potentially all this infrastructure just to donate a value to the zoo. It really doesn't pencil out, to be honest with you. At that point in time, the zoo would probably move, and we would probably have to find a new tenant because there is no cost sharing from that standpoint. They don't like paying rent right now, and that's been a trouble for them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll go ahead and go to the public. Do we have any individuals who would like to speak in support of the project or the applicant? Do we have any on Zoom? Okay. We'll go back to the public. Do we have any individuals who would like to speak in opposition? Please state your name. You have 3 minutes, miss.
My name is Brunette, and I'm with the Heat. We're in opposition. When you told the staff to give us the paperwork when we were here. This was right after the 4th, after the 3rd. We didn't get it. We went back Friday, which was the 5th. We went that Monday and that Tuesday, and the staff member turned it over to Christine. We were told that Bobby got an email, and we were told where we could go online to get it. Like we told you before, we are not privileged to all of that. We want the paperwork. Then we were told when they finally sent another email that one is available and it's 5 cents per copy, per page. The city receives money from the federal government. All of these machines and paper are being paid for. They're not paying for it out of their pocket. So that further should let you know that they're not informing the community of anything. They're supposed to inform us. They're supposed to give us the paperwork. We don't have any of that when we request it. Those are federal guidelines for the city to even have funds, period, for projects, for anything that goes on in District 3. So we're going to object to it because we did not get the paperwork, and it's an insult for us to have to keep running back and forth to get the paperwork. And they turned it over to somebody else. That's what he did. He told us when we stood here, we said we wanted 12 copies. He told us that he'd give it to us, but then he turned it over to somebody else. Then when we get in the office, we get all this back and forth. Oh, we got to get permission. What you mean you got to get permission? We're supposed to have the paperwork if we request it. What you mean you got to get permission? This is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. They act like it's something from the federal government that can't nobody get. And this is District 3. So whatever goes on in District 3 affects us. And we need the information, and we're supposed to have it. And we did not get it. And we're not going to keep running back and forth. It doesn't make any sense. Because if he told us he was going to give it to us, it should have been at the desk for us to pick it up. But that didn't happen for 3 days.
Thank you, Ms. Before we go to the next individual speaker, can we have staff maybe address this concern?
Yes, thank you, Chair Vang. So a couple of things. One, we've added the email that I was given. We added that to a kind of a list, an email blast that goes out probably every other day with projects throughout the city. So that's one way that the HEAT team can be kept apprised of projects throughout the city. And the issue of the hard copies, the hard copy didn't become available until the Friday after. And so that Friday after the Planning Commission, not 2 days after, but 9 days after, I wanted to, obviously provide current documents. So that's when the staff report became available, and I emailed the email address that I was given, and it was left at our front desk. And so we did provide one hard copy. I understand that she wanted 9 copies, and I explained that additional copies would cost 5 cents per page. So 9 copies, it's basically 5 cents per page for each of those copies.
Question for you is, in a situation like this where you're looking at additional funds it's going to cost like the local community, what's a possible alternative where you have these individuals, like how can they tap into it to make sure that they get these resources too? Is it something that they need to take up with their local representative, or do we have like an alternative to this?
So all the documents are provided electronically. So the staff reports there's links to the entire documents. As you know, some of these staff reports can be 200-300 pages or longer. So that's one of the resources is electronically.
Yeah, so I'm just like in a situation where an individual might not have access to an electronic device, or they can't go online. Is it possible for them to reach out to like the local representative, or is it a possibility where we can have like a copy located in the office for maybe somebody can come by, they can't take it with them, but then there's like a designated area where they can actually review those documents?
Definitely, yes, we can look into that. I'll consult with the city clerk's office as well as city attorney's office and look into that.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's have the next individual speak. Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Bobby. I reside in West Fresno, and I am in opposition because it is in District 3. I'm listening to you, and I'm trying to understand is that anytime there is projects of any kind where that the public needs to be aware of developings or whatever, now I'm hearing is that you are not making the information available. It's kind of like whenever we want to get information to be aware, or when we want to come and either agree or disagree, we can't do that properly because we don't have any information pertaining to this. The only thing that we have, it would be where it is, and it's part of the agenda. But there is no paperwork for us to read or to understand why and where all of this is happening. So it's misleading when that someone is going to tell you you need to agree on this particular thing, but though you have no information on it. You know, it's contradictory to say you're going to vote on something, but then you don't have all the information or that you haven't read it. How can you properly, vote or agree on something if you don't have all the information? This is in District 3, and as Brunette said, anything in District 3 does affect us. So we are concerned with what goes on. And right now, it used to be available that we could get information. Now, all of a sudden, it's a cost. But like we do know is that there are federal monies that are being allocated all the time for the public to be aware of what's going on or what developings are happening in their community or in their district. So I am opposing because of those circumstances.
All right, thank you, Miss. Any other individuals who would like to speak? Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Diane Bennett Smith. I live in West Fresno. I'm also a member of HEAT. And I have to go on top of what Bobby and Brunette has said. We've been coming to city council meetings, planning commission meetings, every meetings that nearly the city have. Those documents used to be made available to the public because the public are the ones that are being impacted by the information that's in those documents. You wonder why you don't have a lot of community people in here? Because they don't know what you guys are doing, because the paperwork isn't given to them. You want them to read online. A lot of elderly people don't have computers. You can't sit at your computer for long periods of time if you have it without affecting your vision. The fact that the city is being there's no transparency in what the city is doing. This, to me, is a systematic decision made by city staff to keep the community in the dark. As they say, whatever happens in one community, whether it's District 3, whether it's District 1, it affects the entire community. The entire community should have access to that information, just like your planning commission. They get a packet. They could read it online. So why are they entitled to get a packet when the community that's going to affect is not getting it? So they can continue to do what you're doing. And as I said before, and I'll repeat it again, biblical term says the wicked shall never prosper, and that's why the city will never prosper.
Do we have any other individual who would like to speak in opposition? All right, we'll go ahead and, do we have any individuals on Zoom? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and close public comments. Do we have any, I'll bring it back to the applicant if you want to address any concerns or have any additional comments.
Again, we've been a part of this district for 56 years, so we definitely want to stay there. That's the whole reason of keeping our corporate office there and having the zoo right next door, which is obviously to their operations going to be perfect for across the street. So I think that's the main focus. I always like to see residents in the area come and interact. I think that's the most important part. So thank you very much.
Yeah, a question for you. I think it's, I understand where the city is coming from in regards to trying to, update everything to make sure that it's up to code. Is there like a miscommunication, or are we just really talking about, numbers and finances in regards to this whole situation?
You mean like a dollars and cents?
Yeah, correct.
$500,000 for streetlights or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think if we were, for those that have been around the area, the donation of the building is probably not close to what the infrastructure is going to cost. And we certainly realize that area is going to change with high-speed rail and everything going around that. We looked at staying in that area, obviously longer. So I think it would, we certainly understand the city's request, but to impose that on no development and a simple lot line reinstatement, I think that's where we certainly differ from that perspective.
Just because, growing up and being born and raised in Fresno, Laos have done wonderful things for the community, right? And it's almost like I wish that you guys would continue the communication to really see what the possible alternative or come to a compromise where both parties can actually be happy with the decision too, right? Do we have any questions or comments for the applicant?
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and we'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have any comments or motion?
I have a question. It seems to me kind of an onerous request for the applicant, knowing that at some point in time, all of those improvements are going to go away because of the high-speed rail. And if that's the case, it just seems that it's kind of a bureaucratic demand rather than being practical and looking at the long term of, what's going to happen in that location. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around that. That those demands are being made if they're going to be torn out.
Good evening again. This is Harmon Dollywall. Again, for the high-speed rail portion of Olive Avenue, they're going to touch down east of this parcel, and Caltrans is going to do a separate project west of West Avenue. So this will be the only area that's not going to be improved by either the high-speed rail project or the Caltrans project.
So it's going to be in a little bubble?
It's outside of both footprints of both projects, yes. High-speed rail does have to do some improvements about tying in, but they're not required to put in the streetlights. They are doing the streetlights east of this parcel and on the olive grade separation and installing a new signal at the Roding Park entrance to the zoo, but they are not doing any physical improvements at the actual intersection or along the frontage of what is owned by Lyle's currently.
Thank you.
A question for the city staff too. The applicant, ultimately, they want this reinstatement of property line, and like you mentioned, Israel, that's going to be a separate application, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
If there is a process called the unmerger of parcel, that's a separate application, so that's not before you tonight. The applicants, they can submit an application for that. We did look into that, and we found that it doesn't meet the requirements of the Subdivision Map Act.
So why wasn't that just done? Couldn't you have just done that?
So no, it wasn't a feasible alternative to this project to create a property line.
Mr. Schiller, can you go ahead and have a seat, and then I'll ask the commissioner if we're going to allow you to speak on this one too, okay? Just because we have these procedures that we have to follow. Commission, are you guys okay with Mr. Schiller answering any of these questions? You okay? You okay with it? Mr. Scheller, go ahead. Yes.
Chair Vang, if you've closed the hearing, you'll need to vote to open it back up again.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion to allow for Mr. Scheller to state a comment. Do I have a second? Okay. We have a second made by Commissioner Diaz. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion's approved. Go ahead.
My apologies. Relative to the unmerger, we did look at that, but in the MAP Act, there's a time frame, and we're out of that time frame because it's been, a dozen years. So to say that, yeah, that's a separate application and we can just do that, we're just going to be down this bureaucratic hole again. So that's a part of the process that we've already worked through with city staff. I wish we were in the time frame. I wish that could help, but at this point in time, from our legal counsel, that didn't look like it was going to help us, or we would have certainly pursued that right out of the gate.
Thank you. Like, this is what I want to do. I think it's, I want to be very considerate to Heat for coming out here and making sure that they get the voice heard too. So what I'm going to make a motion is I'm gonna go ahead and continue this to a date certain for August 7th, with the hopes that they get these documents so they can make this informed decision. Also, this will allow Mr. Scheller to continue the conversations with the city staff. Okay, so I'll make a motion to continue this item to August 7th. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a second. Well, we have a motion made by me, a second by Commissioner Calandra. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion's approved. All right, now we're moving on to new matters. Well, let's go ahead and, let me go ahead and get Commissioner Bray. I'll be back. All right, so now we'll go ahead and move to item ID 24940, consideration of a CUP application number P2303676. That's a Great Lake and tie, by the way.
Appreciate it. Good evening, Chair Vang, Commissioners. Chris Lang with the Planning and Development Department. For your consideration tonight is conditional use permit application number P2303676 and the related environmental finding. The subject property is 0.75 acres located on the west side of North 9th Street, just north of East Olive Avenue. The subject property is zoned RS5 and RM1 for a small portion on the southern part of the property. Multifamily residential is permitted in the RS5 zone district, subject to a conditional use permit, and that needs to be considered by the Planning Commission, who serves as the review authority. To the north and south of this project are existing multifamily residential apartment buildings, and then to the west is vacant property. The project site is developed currently with a single-family home. The rear portion of the property is an underutilized vacant land, which is proposed for, or which a two-story apartment building is proposed, which will consist of 8 multifamily units. The total number of units is going to be 9 total units, which would be 12 dwelling units per acre and consistent with the RS5 zone district. Also, a neighborhood meeting was held where one person was in attendance and did not have any objections to the project. And then this project was also noticed to property owners within 1,000 feet of the project site, and as of now, no comments have been received. Staff recommends that you adopt the Class 32 categorical exemption, which was prepared for this project, and approve the conditional use permit, which again proposes an 8-unit apartment complex on the site with the existing single-family residence. This concludes staff's presentation, and I am available to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have any questions from the commission? Go ahead, sir.
So my question is, how would this project help the community?
So again, the project site is currently a single-family residence with a vacant portion in the rear. So it's underutilized. It can be difficult to develop. So the applicant is proposing 8 apartment units, which will ultimately provide housing, which is needed for the surrounding area. And again, there are development standards which they're going to be required to provide landscaping, buffering to make sure that it's consistent with current development and doesn't affect the single-family residences to or single-family zone property to the east and southeast, or sorry, west and southwest of the site.
Any other questions?
Yes. Would this project be considered affordable income apartments or low-income apartments?
I would have to defer to the applicant, although I believe is it market rate? It is market rate.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's please have the applicant.
Hello, Planning Commission. I'm Nick Crawford, architect and applicant.
Nick, do you want to speak about the project at all, or anything else that you want to let us know about the project?
No, I don't really have anything to add. We're just trying to develop a nice residential building to provide more housing for the community.
Okay. So for the record, Commissioner Diaz had a question in regards to is this project itself will have affordable housing, market rate?
Market rate.
Market rate.
It's planned to be market rate, yes.
Okay. Well,
May we ask what your market rate is approximately?
I apologize, I can't hear you.
Can you give us a ball figure about what marketplace and how much it goes in that area?
I would have to defer to the developers for that information. Hold on one moment. We're planning about $1,400 per month for rent per unit.
Is that 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms?
They're 2-bedroom units, yes.
2 bedrooms?
Yeah, roughly 1,000 square feet.
question. Go ahead.
Maybe I'm missing it, but is there green space in the within the project?
Yes, there is adequate open space within the project. There is a landscape plan
Okay.
with the package submittal.
All right. Anything else you want us to know, or any questions from the commission? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll go to the public. Any individuals who would like to speak in support? Any on Zoom?
None at this time.
No? Okay. Any individuals who would like to speak in opposition? Any on Zoom? All right, we'll go ahead and close all the public comments. I do want to make a comment before we make a motion. Do you have any comments? Okay. Okay. No, I just want to make a comment that Mr. Nick looking at the project itself, and I'm hoping the best for you guys. And I think housing is definitely needed in the area. We'll love next time to hear a lot more about what you're doing for the community and the project itself. I think it's a great opportunity for you to shine and kind of show what you guys are going to build and help out the community with too. So strongly encourage you guys next time to have something for us to see too. Okay. Any comments or motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff's recommendations.
Okay. We have a motion made by Vice Chair Bray. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, we have a second by Commissioner Calandra. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion's approved. Next, we'll go to item ID 24948. This is for considering investing tentative track map number 6192.
Okay. Good evening, Chair, Planning Commission. Again, my name is Rob Holt, City of Fresno Planning. And tonight, staff brings forth consideration track map 6192 and its plan development permit and related environmental finding. The subject property is located at the northeast corner of Blythe and Dayton, which is just south of Dakota, north of Shields Avenue. It's surrounded by single-family residential neighborhoods to the east and south, and rural residential neighborhoods to the north and west. And it is currently zoned medium density, planned for medium density with RS5 zoning, as well as same to the east, south, and north, and then medium low to the west. This is in the city and is surrounded by the county to the north and west, and partially south. The proposed tract map consists of the subject property is approximately 15.82 acres with 128 lots proposed. And that results in a density of 8.09 dwelling units per acre, which falls in line of the RS5, which is requirement of minimum of 5, maximum of 12 units per acre. The average lot size for the subdivision is 4,043 square feet. There is a planned development for setbacks, interior and front and rear side, as well as for a private development, private streets and gated development. This was reviewed by the District 1 Project Review Committee. They did have concerns, and those concerns were addressed afterwards with the map, which resulted with a map providing sidewalks on both sides of the street, parking on one side of the street, and open space provided at more than the minimum requirement, which you can see centrally located, highlighted by the green area. And there is a 15-foot landscape setback that is conditioned per the West Area Community Plan along Blythe Avenue for it being a collector street. That is a requirement. There also will be landscaping along the entrance along Dayton, just the southern, adjacent to the southern property lines of those properties along Dayton. So there will be street trees and landscaping as you enter the subdivision going inwards. Staff did receive an email with concerns that was provided to us after the public hearing was noticed, and I'm just going to address those concerns now. One of them was a disruption of soil, dust, and contamination of soil. They were concerned of that. Staff's response is that there's mitigation measures with requirement for a stormwater pollution plan that require dust prevention measures, as well as it'll have to comply with the requirements of San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. They were concerned about the potential for two-story homes and privacy concerns. Based on lot sizes and information provided by the applicant, is that two-story homes will be on every property within the subdivision. But as part of that, they will have to comply with the height requirement, 35 feet of the RS5 zone district, which does allow for 2 stories, but at 35 feet max. And there is a minimum 10-foot rear yard setback along requirement, which is standard of RS5, along the boundary of the subdivision, excepting one lot at the southeast corner, which is due to the FID pipeline, as well as the shape and regular shape of the lot. But other than that, all rear yard setbacks along the outside boundary of the subdivision will be 10 feet minimum. And the last was, what is the separation between the adjacent development and the new tract? There's only one connection point public street-wise. Before you enter the subdivision, there's a public street that heads south into an existing development. That will be the only connection. There is no connection within the boundaries of the subdivision itself to any adjacent property because it is private and gated. And generally, I like to provide kind of an overall view of what the track map would look like, superimposed in the area so you can see how it would compare to the neighborhood surrounding it. I'll leave that here for just a second so you can view that. And with that, staff recommends adoption of the environmental assessment, approval of the map, and approval of the plan development. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, but are there those paseos or walkways coming out of the development? I couldn't really see it on the map.
Where located? Where are you asking?
Oh, any.
Oh, there aren't. There is an emergency vehicle access point at the end of the cul-de-sac to the along Blythe, but there are no paseos because again, this is that would be the only place to put it other than Dayton. Everywhere else is existing development surrounding it and not streets. But that was not proposed. It was an EVA access point along Blythe, and then as well as there's conditions of approval from Fresno Area Express to put in a bay at starting at the southern end along Blythe going northward.
So the ones on the edges are just backing up to other houses? Homes.
Correct, yes, which are existing. Well, to the south and east. The north is rural residential.
Question.
Yes.
That email that we saw also had a question about the fencing. Will the applicant be replacing
Yes, I
the
apologize.
fence?
Yes, I did talk with the applicant. They are going to put up new fences along the boundary of the subdivision, and there is a condition of approval to require a wall along Blythe. It's my understanding that they are also proposing a wall along Blythe to let that entrance in along with those street tree requirements.
Okay, great.
I mean, I'm sorry, along Dayton. I apologize, along Dayton, but requirement along Blythe.
Is there a certain requirement of a wall, how high it needs to be?
6 feet. There was no sound study done or required, so it didn't recommend anything more than that.
Is there a green space in the area, in that development?
Right, the large green space essentially located, 0.28 acres. It's kind of highlighted in green. I don't know if you can see that. It's a subdivision requirement, subdivision design requirement under Article 41 to require open space generally centrally located for the entirety of the subdivision to enjoy.
Will it have any amenities?
The open space.
Just open space?
Correct. That's the requirement from code.
And who maintains it?
It would be the HOA because it's private development.
Is there any like traffic impact to the community?
I can let Harmon speak to that. There is.
Please.
Let Harmon speak to that.
So good evening, Harmon Dollywall again, Public Works Department. So this project was conditioned with several requirements from traffic. The first is to install a traffic signal at the intersection of Blythe and Dakota. And the second requirement is to construct a safe routes to school path on the east side of Blythe to Dakota, and then on the north side of Dakota to the eastern property line of the future Dolores Huerta City Park, which will allow the kids to have a place to walk, and that's not on the street to get to Steinbeck Elementary.
All right, any other questions?
Motion to approve
We're gonna
staff
have-
recommendations? Oh, we haven't had
Yeah.
that. I know, I'm getting ahead of things.
What's the price range of these properties or these homes?
There was no mention of anything in the operational statement on price range or affordability level, so I will defer that to the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Calandra, I love the enthusiasm there.
I know.
Me too.
Do we have the applicant?
Good evening, Commissioners. Chair Bonique Emerson with Precision Civil Engineering. and I'm representing the project applicant, who's D.R. Horton. I do have a brief presentation, but it was mainly to go over the comment letter that was received, and Rob covered that pretty much, so I don't need to go through it unless you guys want to see it. But in response to the question of price, there is no price. These will be standard single family for what's typical for this area. So it'll be market rate single family homes, but no price determined yet. And I can answer any other questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, do we have any questions? Questions?
Are these, okay, you already said marketplace, so there's no affordable housing in that development?
No affordable housing proposed as part of this. And I forgot to mention, I do want to thank staff for all their assistance. This has been a long process, but really great process working with staff, and glad we're finally here at this stage. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the public. Do we have any individuals from the public who would like to speak in support? Please state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Matthew Chavez. I am the forward planner for this project with D.R. Horton. I want to echo Bonique's thanks to city staff with this presentation and getting this project before you guys tonight. And also just want to let you know that I am here to answer any questions or address any concerns that haven't already been covered.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other individuals who would like to speak in support? Any on Zoom? Okay. We'll go to the public. Any individuals who would like to speak in opposition? Any on Zoom? All right. We'll go ahead and close all public comments. We'll bring it back to the commission. Do we have a motion or comments?
I'll make that motion now to approve staff recommendations.
We have a motion made by Commissioner Calandra, a second by Commissioner Diaz. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion's approved. All right, next we have item ID 24361. This is for a workshop on the updating housing law. Do we need to announce Commissioner Diaz?
Have to bring it down.
She has to take off. Do we need to announce that she's leaving?
Yes, you can announce that Commissioner Diaz is leaving and she's going to watch the training later on video. Thank you.
There's going to be a quiz on it too, so.
Good evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. My name is Ashley Atkinson. If you were here a couple weeks ago, I was introduced as the new Assistant Director for the Planning Development Department, joining my colleagues to oversee current planning, long-range planning, building and safety, and historic preservation. So I'm happy to be here to share a workshop with you. This is only my second meeting, but glad to have an opportunity to share some knowledge and background on some of the most important laws affecting housing and the decisions that you all make around housing here in the city of Fresno, although these are statewide laws. This is called an updated California housing law workshop because there was one presented to the commission a couple of years ago, 2022 spring. I'm not sure who was on the commission at that time, so it may be an update for you if you were there. If not, a good overview. And it's also addressing just key housing laws. There are many laws affecting housing in this state, and I'm sure you've been paying attention to all of the new laws that the legislature has been passing in recent years, literally dozens. So we're not going to go over all of those, also not going to go into them in great depth. You know, there's a lot of nuance to these laws, and sometimes decisions hinge on a single word. But we will try to give you a good overview and background in about 15 minutes. So if we can go to the next slide, please, or do I have? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. All right. I get a pass on not knowing where the clicker is for meeting number 2, right? Okay, so just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. A couple of laws that have been in place for quite some time that do still affect the decisions that you're making, in part because they have recently been updated by some of the newer laws. And two of those newer laws you might be familiar with are SB 330 as updated by SB 8, Senate Bill 8. Those are known as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. That one continues to be updated and was updated again last year for new changes to take effect this year. And then we're going to go over a few more of the laws that were passed last year and took effect in January of this year, including Senate Bill 423, Assembly Bill 1633, and Assembly Bill 1485. Again, just scratching the surface of what's out there, but going over some of the ones you're going to possibly be hearing about or encountering most often. Okay, so first, the Permit Streamlining Act. This is not specifically a law that pertains to housing only, but it is one that is kind of a cornerstone for permit processing and decision making in California. It goes back to 1977, so it's been quite some time. It requires cities to expedite the processing of permits for development projects, and when they say permits, they include the types of entitlements and planning decisions that come before you. So it provides for time limits in which local government agencies, namely cities and counties, have to complete key phases of their review. We're not going to go into those in detail because there is a lot of detail to it, but generally there's deadlines for determining whether an application is complete, for completing the environmental review, and then finally for approving or disapproving proposed projects. And again, I bring that up because one of the more recent laws does impact the Permit Streamlining Act when it comes to timelines for housing. There are a couple of exceptions. This doesn't apply to legislative land use decisions, so those are things like your general plan, your zoning ordinance, where the city council would approve, and also ministerial actions where there's no decision made at all, just a ministerial or administrative disapproval issued. So the next kind of legacy law to be aware of is the Housing Accountability Act that was enacted in 1982. So again, several decades in existence, but it has recently come back into prominence because it is being strengthened, amended, and invoked much more often in recent years with the attention to housing and the housing crisis. So essentially, the Housing Accountability Act establishes that a local government can't reduce the first it can't deny or reduce the density of or make infeasible a housing development project, also an emergency shelter or farm worker housing, as long as that project is consistent with objective local development standards. So basically, if it meets those objective standards, it should be approved. And the reason I've underlined housing development projects and objective local development standards is because over the years there's been some confusion about what exactly those things mean, and those definitions have now been clarified, which gives a little more strength to this law, even though it's been in place many times, or sorry, for many years. If a city or local government does want to deny or reduce the density of a housing project, it has to make specific written findings based upon evidence that a adverse health or safety impact exists. And we'll look at those findings in a little more detail in a minute. As I said, it's been amended a number of times in recent years, bringing it kind of more into the forefront. It's been expanded and strengthened, and as the legislature has done that, it's made repeated findings that the lack of housing and affordable housing is a critical problem threatening the economic, environmental, and social quality of life in the state. And that is, the basis on which the legislature is making these changes to the Housing Accountability Act. Just a quick note that there was a court decision in 2022 that it doesn't apply to an individual building a single-family home. So that is not generally, under the purview of the Act, just in case that comes up. Okay, getting to more recent years, the one that you're probably going to hear about or encounter most is the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. That includes several different Assembly and Senate bills at this point, but it was first enacted through Senate Bill 330. That took effect January 1st, 2020. It first established a statewide housing emergency. At first, that was only for 5 years, ending in 2025, but then it was extended to 2030. And generally, the Housing Crisis Act can be said to limit the local agency's ability to regulate housing development projects, basically saying that housing development projects, as they're defined, need to be approved unless they're in certain specific conditions. It does that by making changes to the two laws we just looked at, the Permit Streamlining Act and the Housing Accountability Act. It also establishes, just kind of in principle, that residential development should be guided away from agricultural land and into existing urban areas. It doesn't go into that in a great amount of detail, but establishes that as a statewide policy, and generally aims to increase residential development and expedite permit processing for those residential developments, and then also at the same time protect the inventory of existing housing and the occupants that are living in that existing housing. So we will go into all of those things in a little more detail. I'm not going to read all of this slide, but this is verbatim the findings that the state made in passing this law. Again, reiterating that the lack of housing, including shelters, is a critical problem threatening the economic, environmental, and social quality of life in California. Going over some of the other reasons that they, used as a justification for passing this kind of law, including some of the consequences of not providing enough housing, and the statement that local governments don't always give adequate attention to those outcomes. So, as I mentioned, there are a couple of definitions contained in the Housing Crisis Act that update the Housing Accountability Act and clarify what these things mean, which is actually helpful. It's quite problematic when these state laws don't define things very clearly, because then it's left up to interpretation and it gets interpreted differently, but in different cities, litigated, et cetera. So we now know that a housing development project, and again, this is verbatim, means a use consisting of any of the following: residential units only, mixed-use developments consisting of residential and non-residential units with at least 2/3 of the square footage designated for residential use, and transitional housing or supportive housing. So those three things, any of them fall under the Housing Crisis Act. It also defines objective, where we talked about objective local development standards. We now have a clear definition of objective, meaning involving no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and being uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available, and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official. So essentially nothing that involves any kind of, as it says, subjective judgment. This definition is consistent with another law that is common, we'll mention later, SB 35, and it's useful when definitions are consistent across different laws, so we don't have to think about how to interpret them in different places. So again, if you recall, the three aims of this law were to increase residential development, expedite permitting, and provide protections for existing housing. So we'll go through the ways it tries to do each of those things. First, looking at how it aims to increase residential development. Essentially, We are, as a city, now obligated to maintain the housing density established in our plans and standards at the level that was in effect in January 2018. So this cities are no longer permitted to change their land use or zoning to reduce density, to reduce standards, or to change standards in a way that would reduce density. That includes things like height, floor area ratio, open space, lot size, setbacks, frontages, etc. It can be permitted if we, at the same time, make other changes to increase density in other areas so that there's overall no net loss in residential capacity across the city, but that's the only case where we are able to do that. So again, generally a limitation of local government ability to make any changes that negatively impact the availability of housing or the possibility of increasing housing development. Second is, again, in ways that it tries to increase residential development, prohibits local government agencies from imposing or enforcing non-objective design standards. Again, going back to that definition of what is objective or subjective, if design standards are put in place, they need to be objective and to meet that definition. Cities can no longer impose growth caps or moratoriums on new housing development, and that includes by voter initiatives, with very limited exceptions necessary to protect public health or safety. And finally, we can't deny, sorry, didn't mean to click slides so quickly. We can't deny or make a housing project infeasible without doing a thorough analysis of the economic, social, and environmental effects of that action. And again, those specific findings based on the evidence in the record. So what are those specific findings? In the case of a market rate project, both of these findings are required. That the project would have a specific adverse impact on health or safety, and goes into a little more detail about what that means. And second, that there is no feasible method to mitigate or avoid the adverse impact. So if you're going to look at denial of a project or making it, adding conditions that would reduce the density of the project, both of these findings would have to be made. And again, here these are verbatim from the law. And again, this applies, just as a reminder, to projects that meet the existing zoning development standards, not to projects that are asking for any type of entitlement or conditions. There's a couple of different findings that apply specifically to affordable housing or emergency shelters, and that's housing that is for people of low, very low, or moderate income. And generally that means when it's discussed in state law that there is a restriction or a covenant on that housing to ensure that it is rented or sold at rates that are affordable to people in those incomes. Again, if you want to deny or put conditions on an affordable housing project or an emergency shelter, one of these findings is required to be made. And they're a little bit different than the ones for market rate projects, but again, verbatim from state law. Moving on to the ways where the Housing Crisis Act tries to expedite permit processing for housing development projects. It requires us to inform applicants that if their projects have an inconsistency or a nonconformity with a plan or policy, basically to tell them, does your project meet the code or does it not meet the code within a certain number of days, depending on the size of the project. 30 days for a project with 150 units or fewer, 60 days if it's more than 150 units. and that's from the time that the application is complete. It also limits the number of hearings that can be held on a housing development project to 5, and that includes any continuations and appeals. Again, limiting the time that can be spent and the number of times that the project can be heard. Speaks to when we have to determine that a project is located on a historic site. Basically, at the time we deem their application complete, we are asked to make that determination. Finally, establishes this optional preliminary application process that basically kind of sets the codes and regulations that apply to those that were in place at the time the application was submitted. And again, that's optional and voluntary, something that applicants can invoke at their option. Finally, the ways that the Housing Crisis Act tries to protect existing housing inventory. It essentially establishes a policy of no net loss of any housing units. So any project that proposes to demolish housing has to replace that an equal number of units, equal or greater. So if you were proposing to demolish a duplex, you would have to build at least 2 units back, if not 3 or more. There's another category of review that applies if those units are occupied or in a category they call protected. The project has to meet additional criteria. There are relocation benefits, monetary benefits provided for displaced tenants. The tenants have the right to remain in the unit until 6 months before the construction begins. For qualified tenants, generally those that are low income, they have a right to return to protected units in the new building, which sometimes means covenanting additional affordability on that new building, just depending on what the circumstances were of the existing units. This category of protected units does get a little tricky. But it's defined as units that within the last 5 years had any type of restriction on them, restricting their rents, whether that was a citywide rent control or a covenant on that particular project. If there was anyone living in them that was low income, if there was rent control in place again, or if those units had been withdrawn from the rental market pursuant to the statewide Ellis Act. So again, there's a lot of nuance to that, but generally, if those units were protected, then the tenants in those units have additional rights. The Housing Crisis Act has been amended a couple of times already. SB 8 was the first amendment effective January 2022. Again, that one extended the expiration to 2030. So as of now, we still have about 6 years left on this law unless it's made permanent. It clarified that this Housing Crisis Act, all the provisions we just discussed, also apply to ministerial projects, meaning those where we're just reviewing and not actually making decisions. Projects that propose a single dwelling unit or an ADU are also subject, and projects using the statewide density bonus program. There's also a clarification of concurrently. If you recall earlier, a city is allowed to downzone or change the general plan or the zoning code to reduce density in one area as long as it's increased in another area. It says that you have to do that concurrently, meaning that they take effect at the same time. One more amendment to this law just took effect in January of this year, and it basically expanded all of those replacement requirements we just discussed, meaning if you tear down a unit, you have to build a unit, to non-residential developments. And that's kind of noteworthy because it essentially means if you were tearing down a single-family home and building a car wash, you would be obligated to replace that single-family home somewhere. It can be off-site, does not have to be on that site, but that it does obligate you to do that, which can obviously become a tricky matter in people that were, projects that were not proposing to build any new housing. There is a slight error on this slide. It should not say protected residential units. That should be struck, but just like to note that for the record. And then there's exceptions for certain industrial projects in non-residential zones, which makes some intuitive sense that you wouldn't necessarily want to require housing to be replaced in a zone that doesn't allow housing, where the housing is non-conforming and where the new use is industrial. So that concludes the material on the Housing Crisis Act. I'll just note a few other laws that took effect in January of this year. Assembly Bill 1633 establishes that if a city does not approve or deny a project due to CEQA-related delays, that is a violation of the Housing Accountability Act. Just a clarification there that those CEQA-related delays are subject. Senate Bill 423 amends Senate Bill 35. Again, that was another noteworthy bill of recent years. Senate Bill 35 provides for streamlined review in cities where the targets of the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, haven't been met. Senate Bill 423 expands SB 35 to include not just cities that haven't met their RHNA targets, but to cities without a compliant housing element. It extends it for 10 years, makes another number of other changes to SB 35, but they're quite detailed, so I don't want to cover them here. And then finally, Assembly Bill 1485 grants the California Attorney General the unconditional right to intervene in lawsuits enforcing state housing laws. Previously, the Attorney General had to petition the court to join a lawsuit. Now the Attorney General has the ability to join any lawsuit that they wish. And I think you've probably seen or read that the Attorney General is becoming a lot more active in enforcing different housing laws in different cities around the state. And this is kind of a continuation of that trend. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. If there are implementation questions, I might have to ask for help from some of the staff here, since it's still week 4 and I don't know exactly how we're doing everything, but I'll do my best to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate this clarification. What defines affordable housing? I mean, are there numbers that?
Yeah, so generally in state law, I mean, when people say affordable housing, in the public or, in any room, it's a good question to always ask. But in state law, when it says affordable housing, it's generally referring to housing that has some restriction on it that requires it to be rented to certain income levels at an amount that's affordable to people in that income bracket for a certain number of years. Usually that's done by a covenant. And so and generally that's done for projects that either get federal money, state money, city money, or they're using an incentive program that requires them to do that. Usually that's the density bonus program. There's some other ways that affordable housing might get into the mix, but those are the main ways. And then generally, it's for people making 80% of the area median income. That's considered low income, and below that is very low, extremely low. Sometimes it'll go up to 120% of the area median income. That's considered moderate income. But if there's no restriction saying, this project or this unit has to be rented to a person of that income, it's not considered affordable under, usually what we're talking about in state laws.
So it's more about the people's income than the price of it.
Right, and then it has to be rented at a rate that they can afford. It's generally 33% of the income in that bracket. It's also a kind of complicated thing. There's limits set by the state and the federal government once a year that say exactly how much it can be.
It seemed like that last project that's not affordable, it's market rate, but $1,600 a month is kind of affordable.
Yeah, there's another concept that people are using these days naturally occurring affordable housing, NOAA, if you want another acronym. But that refers just to housing that is, again, naturally affordable. It's affordable because the price of the land and the price of construction was not that high. You know, the market, you know, the people who live in that area aren't going to pay more than that for that type of unit. So I think natural affordability is a good thing to aspire to. But generally, when a state law says affordable housing, it means the first kind we discussed.
So what is the city doing to, you know, this is huge. I mean, we do have housing crisis in California. I mean, especially with affordability. I mean, a lot of people are having trouble affording a house in California. So how are we, so is the city ready for all this? Is the city ready to pretty much give the red carpet to the developers?
Well, we are updating our housing element as we speak, but I might defer to Jennifer to answer that question.
Sure, thank you. Great question. So we've worked really hard to streamline our procedures so that we can be very responsive to first determining if an application is complete. Are all the pieces parts there? Not is it right or wrong? As a teacher, you understand, right? So did they turn it in on time? Is their name at the top of the page? Did they write the date, right? So those basic elements, are they there? Not did they answer the questions correctly? Then we get it routed, we get it out to whoever needs to review it, and we work very hard to follow objective development standards. How tall is it? How big is it? How many units is it? How many parking places? How many trees, right? So very, very carefully go through the objective development standards so that we can process as quickly as possible. I feel like we get beat up a lot about our timelines, but I feel that we are very effective in processing applications and getting them out the door as quickly as possible. Mr. Holt, as a matter of fact, has processed a number of applications that are required to meet that 30 and 60-day timeline, and has done so successfully. So we've worked really hard as a team. Obviously there's always room for improvement, but in terms of that, I feel like we are very prepared as a team to follow those laws.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So next, before we do reports by secretary, Jennifer, are we going to stop these Zoom meetings or allowing individuals to join the meetings on Zoom?
So that is a really great question. So during COVID, as you recall, the Planning Commission and our development review committees, project review committees, began following virtual meeting protocol similar to what the City Council was doing and what was being permitted by state law. The City Council has recently changed or modified the way that they are holding their meetings. And unless certain circumstances exist, they will be broadcasting the meeting via Zoom, but they will not be accepting public comment via Zoom. When the council took away those provisions, we actually do not have any virtual meeting provisions in the city or the Planning Commission bylaws or any of our district committees. So beginning in August, we will be following suit and we'll be going back to our standard procedures where individuals who would like to comment will need to come to the meeting. And we will be following the Planning Commission bylaws in that particular case. So it will still be broadcast via Zoom, but we will not be accepting public comment via Zoom. Yes, ma'am. We still, yes. So the public access channel still has, and I believe it's channel 96, 7, 8. I had 6. Thank you. The public access channel still broadcasts this live, and it does repeats on a schedule. Yes. So in addition to Zoom, which you have to register for, but you can also view via your television.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any reports for us?
I just have one. I wanted to be responsive to your question regarding copies. So the city, and we had an extensive conversation with the city clerk earlier this week. The master fee schedule does have an opportunity for individuals who would like to sign up to have agendas, not attachments, agendas mailed either quarterly or annually. There is a fee for that. It's $20 quarterly or $70 annually. We would be happy in the planning department to follow suit and have that added to our section of the code as well, of the municipal, the master fee schedule. It does not have a fee for getting the attachments. So this does not, that $20 fee or that $70 fee does not cover the attachments or the exhibits. There is a $5 reproduction fee per 8.5 by 11 page, which is also listed in the master fee schedule. So just wanting to be responsive there while, there are times when there are specific federal projects where we have certain plans or certain applications available for public to come in and view. Most of the work that is done in this department is done through application fees. So our budget and applications are intended to pay for themselves. So what we charge the applicant is what it actually costs us to do. So the same would be true of requesting copies and of attachments or exhibits. So that is how the city pays for the costs that it has. And that was really my only comment for tonight.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I understand that Israel's been working with them too. So just want to, some of the stuff that we deal with, a lot of it is just making sure that the process is as fair as possible. So that way they can accept the outcome. So I do understand that and do praise the staff too for working with the community. I know it can be very difficult sometimes and we don't want to trade place with you guys, but definitely do appreciate all the stuff that you guys do for the community too. Okay. Next, do we have any unscheduled oral communications? Any on Zoom? Okay. So it's 7:43. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.